So I want you to think about something. I want you to answer the question in your head. You don't have to answer out loud, but how do you typically respond when life gets difficult? You know how there's some days and some even weeks where it just feels like it's one thing after another. Like things just keep getting worse and worse. It's like that saying, when it rains, it pours. And it just is so overwhelming at times. So, what is your go to natural response to those moments? Maybe you talk to friends about it, you have somebody that you trust that you can talk to. Maybe you're pretty emotional and you cry often. Or some of you may get really, really upset or confused or stressed out. Or I was guilty of this one a lot when I was younger. I would just kind of pretend like I didn't care that things were difficult, and I would just kind of like suppress it. And then eventually, obviously, we know that leads to an emotional outburst. And so, what do you do in these moments? How do you respond when life gets difficult? And I want us to consider this because, as you know, last week we started our new series, Did You See God? And we're looking at the life of Joseph. Joseph in the Old Testament, not Joseph, Mary's husband, in the New Testament. But we're looking at the life of Joseph. And if you remember even just some of Anthony's teaching from last Sunday, then you would know his life was pretty difficult. He had a really rough start. And to summarize, we learn really quickly in Joseph's story that he's in a very dysfunctional family. He has a lot of brothers, and we're told that he's his dad's favorite son. And so obviously then that leads to just a lot of drama. His dad gives him this elaborate coat because he's his favorite son. And obviously his brothers do not like that. And then Joseph gets this dream from God, where in this dream, God pretty much shows him that he's going to be so prosperous and successful, and that all of his family is going to bow down to him one day. And so obviously when he shares that with his family, nobody likes that. And so naturally his brothers decide, all right, we're going to kill him. And then they thankfully decide not to kill him, but instead they decide to just sell him as a slave to some traders who were on their way to Egypt. And then they lie to their dad about it. They dip his coat in blood and they tell the dad, oh, Joseph got devoured by an animal. The dad is so sad because this was his favorite son. And it's just drama. This is Joseph's life. And this morning, where we're going to pick it up is right after his brothers sell him. In Genesis 39, verse 1, it's going to be on the screens. It says, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. And before we go on, I want to pause here because I love this play on words. We know geographically that they took him down to Egypt because if you look at a map, they went down. But I love this play on words because what's also happening in this moment is Joseph is being put down as a person. He is being lowered. With every step, he is being reminded that he is entering a foreign land where he knows no one. He will never see his family again. His brothers just betrayed him, like he is literally in the lowest of lows. He will have to adjust to living in Egypt. He is now a slave. So with every step, he's becoming more and more powerless. And now the question is, like I asked you, how is Joseph going to respond to this difficult season in his life? Because this is really difficult. Will God remain with him even in these moments? And what about that dream that God gave him? That was not just like some silly random dream that we may experience today, but this dream that Joseph had was a promise from God. And at this point, it's all he had to hold on to. And will that be enough for him? Will he keep living his life for God, or will he finally give up and start over? Because where is God in this moment? And we actually get a direct answer to that question in the next verses. Genesis 39, verses 2 through 6. We're going to read them together. It says, the Lord was with Joseph, so that he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care, with Joseph in charge. He did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. And now this is a sigh of relief when reading Joseph's story. As the reader, you're almost like, finally, like this man catches a break. He went into Potiphar's house completely powerless, completely distraught probably, and now he has been elevated to being in charge over all that Potiphar owns, and that takes a significant amount of trust. And now this is twofold. One, Joseph had some gifts and skills that God placed inside of him that he used and that he worked hard at. He was great at administration. He probably managed finances really well. He was probably very organized and a great leader. And he used these gifts. He got better at them and he worked at what God had gifted him with. But also, and more importantly, God was with him. He decided to remain a faithful God follower, and God remained with him. And Potiphar not only saw that, but he was blessed by it. Potiphar was this Egyptian man, not a God follower at all, but he then benefited from having Joseph in his house. Everything Potiphar had was successful. His household was successful because of Joseph, and that is only because God was with Joseph. So we can see that even in Joseph's extremely unfortunate circumstance, he was a part of something bigger than himself. He remained faithful to God, and not only was he blessed by it, but Potiphar was blessed by it. Therefore, the community that they served was blessed by it. And so even in his painful reality of being betrayed and sold, he does not ditch God. His response is to remain faithful, and he sees and he realizes that God remained with him. And that all sounds great, right? But what if things get messier? What if things get worse? And so we're going to pick it up in Genesis 39, verses 6 through 8. It'll be on the screens. It says, Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man, and Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. Come and sleep with me, she demanded, but Joseph refused. And so this is obviously a tricky situation, right? So then Joseph goes on to tell her that Potiphar has trusted him with everything, so he cannot do such a thing. But more than that, he says, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? Joseph recognizes that this would be a direct sin against God and also against the covenant of marriage. And then the story goes on to say that day after day, she spoke to Joseph, pressuring him to be with her. And day after day, Joseph kept refusing her and refusing her. And I want to pause here and note that some of us know what it feels like for our faithfulness to God to be challenged day after day. I've talked to some of you before where you tell me that in your friend group at school, it is very normal to get invited to go smoke or to get invited to go do things that you know would be something against your values, something against what you want to do. And day after day, you are in that environment and you are probably getting thoughts like, oh, what's one time going to do? I just want to have some fun. My friends are going to be so happy if I finally give in. What is one little slip up going to cost me, right? And I've even talked with some of you before where you start dating someone and it gets really enticing to start crossing the boundaries that you thought you would never cross because you think, oh, well, we really love each other. We've been together a long time. It'll make me happy. And things that you never thought you would start thinking become really enticing. Or some of us, I'd even say all of us, know exactly what it's like when somebody makes us upset or hurts our feelings, and it takes everything in us to not act on the anger that we feel or even the hurt that we feel. And whether that's giving them attitude or you like know exactly if it's somebody close to you. Like this used to happen a lot with my sister. Like I knew exactly what to say to her because I knew like the things that she wasn't good at, and I knew all of like her weaknesses. So in moments where she made me upset, it took every ounce of self-control in me to not just like fire back at her. And we all know that feeling when somebody hurts us or makes us upset. We want the natural and easy response is to say something rude back, or to maybe even some of you get in fights often, and so it's to get violent, or even if you just think something really bad about them, you are giving in to the natural easy response. And we are always going to be met with these decisions, the decisions that Joseph finds himself in here, where the wrong thing is easy, it's more accessible, and it probably will feel better in the moment, but the right thing is really difficult and even inconvenient at times. And staying faithful to God and what you know is right may feel like a challenge. But in this moment that Joseph is in, he fully understood that his actions would have been a sin against God and a sin against the man that he worked for. Therefore, he chose the difficult, less satisfying thing. And so what happens next? Joseph, well, then he keeps refusing her because every single day she keeps bugging him. And one day he was just minding his own business, working, and she grabbed him by his coat and insisted again that he be with her. It says that he left his coat in her hands and he ran away. Like he literally ran out of the house. And because his coat was still in her hands, the text tells us that when she realized that, she called in her servant and she told them that Joseph was trying to be with her, and then that she got away from him and he left his coat there. So she straight up just created this lie saying that Joseph was the one trying to pursue her. And then she tells her husband Potiphar this lie. So in Genesis 39, verse 19 through 20, it says, when his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, this is how your slave treated me. He burned with anger. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. So Joseph went to prison for something he didn't do, but even worse, for something that he refused to do over and over again. He made the right choice, but his life didn't get better right away. It actually got worse. And I think something that we've all been guilty of is that we pick up this narrative in life that if we do all the right things, our life will end up exactly how we want it and exactly how we pictured it. Like when we make the difficult but right decisions, it's almost like we're telling God, like, all right, you saw that. I'll take my blessing like right now. Thanks, God. Like I made the difficult decision for you. Now you can give me what I want. And we think that if we are good Christians and we follow all the rules, that we deserve easy lives. But that's not the promise of Jesus to his followers. In John 16, verse 33, Jesus says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace, because in this world you will have trouble. And Jesus doesn't make this statement because God causes difficult things to happen or because that's like a way of you being tested. But he says these things to give us an appropriate and realistic expectation of life. We will experience trouble. Life will get difficult, and our faith will get challenged. And sometimes doing the right thing, it doesn't make life easier right away. Sometimes saying no to the same friends over and over again will get you kicked out of the friend group. Or maintaining your standards for dating will keep you single longer. Or voicing your convictions about what you believe to be right and wrong, and even though you do it with love and with respect, you still might get made fun of. And in Joseph's case, sometimes refusing to sin will get you thrown in jail. But where is God in all of this? And again, we get a direct answer to that. In Genesis 39, 20 to 23, it says, while Joseph was there in prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in prison, and he was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. And so when Joseph decided to stick with his convictions, to do what was right, when he decided to literally run away from sin, no matter what it cost him, his life didn't get less stressful, but God became more real to him. Joseph ended up experiencing more influence, more of his gifting, more blessing, not as a reward for his obedience, not because he knew that God was going to give him all this success in jail, but as a result of his obedience. He remained faithful to God, and God remained with him. And the big idea I want us to catch this morning, it'll be on the screens. It says, when Joseph made the right decision, his life didn't get easier, but his understanding of God got better. When Joseph made the right decision, his life didn't get easier, but his understanding of God got better. Because sometimes when we, as Jesus followers, like I want to preface, Anthony and I always love to preface this. We understand that maybe not all of you in here are trying to follow Jesus. You're just here because somebody dropped you off here while they went to main service, and that's okay. You can just listen along. But for everyone else in here that is trying to follow Jesus and wants to know more of God, I think sometimes when we face temptation and we're tempted to compromise and give in to what's more pleasurable and more fun because we feel like we're missing out on those things, what we don't realize is that when we compromise, even if it's a small compromise and it's not this huge, massive thing, but you're being lenient with yourself with a little thing after little thing, what we're really missing out on is knowing God better. We're missing out on discovering more of his goodness and what that can practically look like in our lives. Joseph saw more of God's grace, more of God's favor, more of the gifts that God gave him while he was in jail, in the unlikeliest of places. And when we make the difficult but right decisions, things may not get easier right away. And that really sucks because we almost feel like, I think we all kind of grew up just knowing a reward system. You do something right, you get a little sticker on your chart, and you feel good about yourself. But life is not like that. Life is very difficult, and it's very challenging. And sometimes making those right decisions, life is not going to just get easier right away. But we just may experience God's nearness and his goodness and his grace and the things that he has for our lives in a way that we have never had before. And so I want you to consider that this morning, those two things. How do you respond when life gets difficult? And when being faced with making a decision, consider this. What's motivating you? What are the things behind the lens that are causing you to make the wrong decision over and over again? And if you are following God and you're trying to figure out, like, what am I missing? Why don't I experience God the way I hear everybody else experience God? What is it about me? Is there something wrong with me? I would have you consider, what are the decisions you're making? Like I said, even down to the small ones. What are the decisions that you're making? And those could be what is pulling you in that direction. Like Joseph, when we make the right decision, we could just experience God in a new way. And believe it or not, Joseph's story gets crazier. If you've never read it before, I'd encourage you, read it this week. I think it goes all the way to Genesis 50, but we're going to be talking about it all month, and we're going to keep asking the question, did you see God? Because there's so many moments in Joseph's life where you ask, where was God in all of this? Like, why is this poor man, why is his life so difficult? But when we really look into it, God's there all along.